I remember just thinking, what the fuck? We just got engaged. We should not be like yelling at each other in the middle of fucking Amsterdam, Holland. We should be like on cloud nine, just so much love for each other. No, none of that. And boyfriend number 2. Learning lesson here. Yeah, recording. I now know that sometimes equipment might go to sleep if you take too long of a break. So we're going to re-record boyfriend number 2. Thankfully, boyfriend number 2 is a shorter episode because boyfriend number 2 was not evil like the rest of them. Can I say that? Okay.
When did you meet?
Okay, so boyfriend number 2 and I met in Mexico. So very shortly, like within it was probably only a few weeks of breaking up with boyfriend number 1. I got invited to go on a trip to Rocky Point, Mexico, which is not too far from Tucson, just over the border, with some of the girls. One of the girls I lived with at the time, there was a volleyball tournament happening, and one of my roommate's friend was playing in the volleyball tournament, and then a group of a co-ed group from Phoenix and Tucson were kind of all going to be in it. So we tagged along just for fun, and yeah, we met there. So he was playing in the tournament, and he knew some of the people in that group, and we kind of had a little bit of a flirty energy between us. Nothing happened in Mexico between us. I was very newly single, as I mentioned, but on the ride back home from Mexico to Phoenix, he asked for my number. We exchanged contacts and we stayed in touch. And then shortly thereafter, summer break rolled around. So this is summer break before senior year. So I moved back up to Oregon and spent the summer in Bend. And him and I stayed in touch and talked. And I actually flew down to Phoenix to visit him at one point for a long weekend. And I think at that point, after that weekend together, we had a great time, and we kind of, whether it was spoken or not, we were exclusive. And then after finished the summer out in Bend, moved back to Tucson to finish my senior year at U of A. He was so he went to Arizona State. He was already out of college though and working full time. Yeah, we dated all throughout my senior year. It was great. He came down for my graduation. He met all of my family, all my parents. I met his parents. Great guy. Nothing bad to say about him at all. I did though. So I moved up to Phoenix. So I graduated May 2014 from U of A, but I moved up right before my final semester because I only had 1 or 2 classes to wrap up before graduation. And I wanted to take those classes online and get a jump start on the interviewing for a full-time job process. No, they had already moved back to Oregon. So I got an apartment in Phoenix and was working part-time at a brewery and then finishing up school and doing an internship program. So telling this story over again. So that was my first gig in the industry, working in the industry, service industry. It was a fun brewery. Loved the brewery. Didn't make the best decisions working at said brewery. But I was hostessing at this brewery for my last semester and kind of into the beginning of summer, right after graduation, and started kind of catching flirtatious feels with a couple of my colleagues, and everyone's fun and nice and flirty, and it's all innocent until it's not. And one of the servers and I, had crushes on one another. And boyfriend number 2. boyfriend number two, he traveled once in a while internationally and domestically for work, and he was abroad, I think, at this time. We didn't live together, but I think he was on a trip in like Germany or something for work. And one of the servers and I, who'd always kind of had a little crushy, flirty thing for a while, unspoken between us. He lived like walking distance from the brewery that we worked at, and him and his buddy, his roommate, who was also worked at the brewery, would once in a while on occasion have people over after. So if we closed up that night, we would frequently like go over and hang out, get beers. You know, this is typical. And had a couple too many beers in me, and server and I ended up like drunkenly making out, and we didn't like go all the way, but there was like definitely crossed some lines. And I I had a couple of these instances with him, but didn't tell anyone about it really, or didn't share this with boyfriend number two. I kind of kept it to myself. I was just enjoying the attention, I think. And somehow it eventually got back to boyfriend number two that some lines had been crossed, and he approached me about it and asked me about it. And so things eventually came to light. And I think at this point we had been together for about a year or so. And yeah, so I was in my own apartment, but then my lease was up and I was spending most of my time at his place anyway. So I ended up moving in with him. And I think we'd been living together for maybe a month or two. Yeah, he had a roommate who is a lovely human named Paul, who is still to this day one of my good friends. So yeah, this all came to light, and he took a couple weeks to process it, and then came back to me and said that he felt like he could maybe work through this and kind of forgive me, and we could maybe move on from it, and it might be able to work. So we stayed together for it was maybe a couple months, but pretty quickly it became clear that we were just like fading away, and it was not gonna, we wouldn't be able to like salvage the relationship because of the trust that I'd obviously broken. And so he eventually called it. He was a few months away from moving out to the East Coast to go to business school to get his MBA. Yeah, grad school. So when we officially like broke up for good, I moved out, got like an Airbnb type of situation for a few months in Tempe. And then once he moved across country and left the apartment, I moved back in, and Paul and I became roommates, and actually stayed roommates for a couple years after that, and are good friends to this day. My first time going to therapy was shortly thereafter, or I think actually I was still maybe with boyfriend number two. I signed up for therapy for my first time ever because I was feeling so lost and so confused and guilty, because how could I, someone who had just spent almost 3 years, 3 years in a toxic, horrible relationship, and had just experienced getting cheated on myself, how could I do anything like that to someone else? So was really dealing with a lot of like guilt and just confusion about that. So that was my first experience with therapy. And I think I stayed in therapy for like 6 or 7 months just to kind of work through that. And then through that therapy learned, I guess kind of came to like realization that it was like a humbling experience, I think is what I was saying before. It was humbling because, I mean, obviously we all make mistakes, but like up to that point in my life, I had never really done someone else wrong like to that degree. So this just felt like I didn't know I was capable of fucking up to this level. So that was very humbling.
Well, and at the time, you kind of looked at it, you thought Eric might be the one.
Yes, I did think at the time, and I was only like 24, I think, but he was so opposite of boyfriend number one in like the best way possible. He was kind and loyal and just a good guy and thoughtful and just all around great guy. And especially, how could I fuck it up and do something like that to someone who was so good to me? So that was kind of a eye-opening for sure. Yeah, my shit does stink too. My shit does stink too, everyone. So yeah, I think, and we, I've seen boyfriend number two once since our breakup, at a wedding. We were both in the wedding party, and he's, happily married now, and I'm sure is doing well. Um, but I think that relationship was like, oh, and this is, I think, what I was saying before too. Like, going into that relationship, I was still carrying a lot of baggage from boyfriend number one and all of the trauma and like manipulation, which boyfriend number two was none of those things. But like, I was carrying all that and still processing that. And because there was such a short break between the two, I didn't have time. I discovered in therapy, like, there wasn't any time to like really properly grieve and process and like deal with my own shit. So I carried a lot of that shit from the previous relationship into the next one, and then, for the first time in my life, had a little bit of sense of freedom working at the brewery. Wasn't single, but was kind of feeling just the temptations to want to be single and just to be able to flirt and like do whatever I wanted and not have to answer to anyone. And so it kind of bubbled up in this way. But it was definitely a learning experience. So
You think it played into it? You talked earlier about how you weren't, boyfriend number two was a great guy, but you weren't necessarily yourself.
right. So yeah, some feedback that I got after boyfriend number two and I broke up. Some friends and family kind of over the years and months later came forward to me, if you will, and shared that they never thought that I was my full self. Like, I remember family making comments about like, you never seemed like you could let your hair down with him. Like, you weren't your goofy normal Kristen. And I think that was a reflection of like me just like not being a confident person at the time. Like, I didn't really know who I was, because I at that point had my entire life was like, being raised under like my parents' roof and having kind of a strict upbringing, and then going straight from that into dating a very manipulative, controlling man for 3 years of my life. And then a few months later jumping into like a relationship with this other human who was wonderful, but I just never had time to like just be and figure out who I was, and not feel like I was accountable to someone else. So, yeah. Yeah, he was away, and it wasn't like there was anything missing with it. Like, it wasn't like I was deprived of like, his attention, or he wasn't, I wasn't feeling a lack of love from him. It was just, I'd never been single. No. And I was like 24 years old and just wanted to kind of like let loose a little bit, and just shouldn't have been in a relationship. Like, that's what I learned from that. I should not have, no matter how wonderful the next person was, if I could go back again and redo that stage, I would, which I wouldn't, because I obviously learned from it, but I would have just kept myself single a little bit longer to just have time for me. So that's boyfriend number two, who was amazing, and we wish him the best. That's good. Boyfriend number three. Oh boy. Boyfriend number 3 / fiance number 1.
Oh, that's right.
Dun dun dun. Now it gets juicy, guys.
Third time to me. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. How did I meet boyfriend / fiance number 3 / fiance number 1? So so I met boyfriend number 3, B3, me 3, C3 2. What is it? C3PO. I met boyfriend number 3 through Paul. Was roomies and good friends with boyfriend number 2. Yes. So Paul and boyfriend number 3 went to school together. And I met him, I think the first time was at, Paul and I had a little like kickback, like not like a house party, but it was just like, I don't know, it was like maybe 15 people or something over at our place in Phoenix downtown, on a weekend night. And he was there, and I can't remember. I think we just like met, and then I think he might have added me on, it would have been Instagram at that point, or maybe it was Facebook. I can't remember. And I think we just kind of started messaging after we'd met because he seemed pretty cool, and we kind of exchanged some social media messages, just like whatever random chit chat. I think he invited me to. I remember being at work one day and getting a message from him and asking me if I was like either invited me to paddleboard or do something outside. It was like an outdoor activity. And then later he told me that he was just trying to get me in a bikini. Wise man. But yeah, so, and at this point I had been single officially for, let's see, February, March, April, May, a whole week, more than a whole week. That's a fair dig. It's fine. At that point, I think I had been officially single for like 4.5, 5 months. And yeah, I'm trying to remember the first time we hung out. It's slipping my memory right now. But we started hanging out as just friends, very much like just as friends, but there was like pretty quickly like a flirty vibe. We did outdoor festivals, but I think more when we were a couple. I don't remember.
This is when you were first hanging out with them. But anyway, go ahead.
Okay. I know. It'll probably come back to me like halfway through. But he was definitely like a social butterfly. He was, I think, 4 or 5 years older than me. So I would have been like 25 at this point, 25, 26. Yeah, he was almost, because we were there for his 30th. So he was 29. So I would have been, I think I was 25. Yeah, he had 4 years on me, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, we started off as just friends, and it kind of became flirty. I remember being very like, at the time, the best I could be honest and upfront with him about the fact that like I really wasn't looking for a relationship, because I was really trying to learn from my first lesson go around of like, give yourself, Kristen, more time to be single. Like, you do not want to get involved. And I was pretty clear about that and open with him about that. And I remember actually telling him, having a like kind of a hard conversation one night. We were out getting drinks at one of our favorite bars in downtown Phoenix, and like telling him like, I really like you and I would love to keep hanging out. And at that point, I think we had like gotten a little bit physical. So it kind of was one of those points where like we were going to be like friends with benefits, or we were going to like be a relationship, or we were going to be nothing at all. And I remember telling him like, I'm comfortable with this friends with a little bit of benefits, and like maybe one day I'll be ready for more, but like, just so you know, right now I'm not. But if you're not cool with that, I totally respect that. And he was like, at the time, said he was cool with it, but you know, kind of kept going through the summer, and we kept hanging out more and more. And then I think we just kind of got to a point where we both were liking each other equally enough that we decided to make it official on my relationship. Yeah, not at the time. Yeah, later on, but not at the time. But boyfriend number 3, so he did show some signs of insecurity, which were yellow flags that I should have taken probably a little bit more as red flags, to be fair. She's fine. Because I remember before we were official, this is actually kind of a fun story I didn't think I would share, but before we were official, I went off to New Jersey for a work trip, and I tacked on a long weekend to do a solo trip to New York. So this was my first time traveling by myself. So I went out to New Jersey for a work trip, and then spent the weekend in New York City by myself. Solo travel, females, do it. My first solo trip ever by myself. I had been to New York a few times prior to that I think the few times prior to that were with boyfriend number 2, because his sister lived out there. I spent New Year's in Times Square, and I just love New York City. I think so question was like, was I wondering or worried if this was going to be uncomfortable, I guess. Was I apprehensive about traveling on my own? I think at the time I was just excited because I'd been to that city before. So it wasn't like a brand new city I'd never been to. It was still in the US. There wasn't like a language barrier. And I love New York City. And I always, ever since my first time visiting, I always thought that one day I would hopefully live there. So I saw this as an opportunity to kind of just spend a few days in like a hustling, bustling city where there's so much to do. You can just wander around and people watch in New York City. Like you don't, I feel like it's an easy place to kind of be alone. Yeah. Number 3 and I were not a couple yet, but we were like talking, like pretty consistently talking, but I had made it very clear to him at this point that I was not ready to be in a relationship. No, not yet. You're getting ahead. So I had this work trip to New York or to New Jersey, spent the weekend in New York by myself. I remember him being a little like, oh, have fun. Like I remember him kind of thinking that was weird. I was spending a few days by myself in New York. There's a little bit of like, what are you doing type of energy, but we weren't together yet. So I remember I got into my hotel in New York and I like Yelped at the time. I think I Yelped like a restaurant to go to, walked to this cute little restaurant bistro bar thing that had outdoor seating. And I remember sitting at the bar because I thought, okay, at least if I sit at the bar, which that's a good tip, ladies, if you want to experience dining out by yourself, but you're nervous to, or anyone, not just ladies, sit at the bar because then at least you can chit chat with the bartender and it makes it a little bit more comfortable. So I sat at the bar. Bartender was like, he was busy enough that like he wasn't able to chat with me as much as I wanted to. And they had a cute little outdoor area. And I thought, okay, well, at least I can people watch because like New York is fun to people watch if you're on the sidewalk. So I like moved out to the patio, sat on the patio. And that was my first time ever dining alone, which can be uncomfortable. Like not many people dine alone, like going out to eat by themselves alone. It's kind of awkward. Why is it awkward?
I don't know. I love it.
Oh, well, most people don't.
Put my earbuds in.
Most people don't like the silence factor, I guess. I hadn't thought about listening to a podcast while I was eating alone, but and well, yeah, that's a good one. But there was these 2 guys from Boston that were sitting across the table from me. I don't know if you know this story. There was 2 guys on a work trip from Boston there, and they saw me sitting at the table by myself, and they're like, hey, like, you here by yourself? I'm like, yeah. They're like, oh, you want to join us? Sure. So I walk over, join them. We end up like hitting the town together. We ate and drank, and I think they ordered us a round of, I was just drinking wine or something. It wasn't like shots, but like we had a glass of wine, a round of wine together. This was the evening, yeah. Like sun was down. No, sun was down. So we just started eating, drinking, talking about like what we do for work, what they were doing for, their work trip, where they're from. I was intrigued because I'd never been to Boston. And I remember telling them that I was kind of on this like that's actually when my travel bug itch, I think, really started, because especially solo wise, because I wanted to see more cities by myself. And so I told them I was kind of on this adventure of like wanting to like experience more cities and countries and travel. And one of the guys was like, oh, well, like if you ever want to visit Boston, like I will be happy to be your tour guide. So we ended up going out that night and I bar hopped with them. And one of the guys and I like hit it off. Like, yeah, we connected. And so we ended up hitting it off, exchanged contacts. I flew back to Phoenix. And then we stayed in touch, and I remember him following up with me, and he was like, I'm serious. If you want to come visit, I'd love to have you. Still, like, I'm like talking to boyfriend number 3, but we're not official yet. And he's like very adamant about like, I'd love for you to come out. And I remember telling him like, I'm like, I just moved and like I was kind of not in a place financially to like be traveling, especially after having just got back from New York. And he was like, well, if you can just get yourself out here, like you're welcome to stay with me. I have a spare bedroom. Like, don't worry about it, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, fuck it. So so I go for it. And so I book a round trip flight to Boston from Phoenix. And this is only like a month or 2 later after I'd met this guy. I don't think I told you this because I was worried about you being scared or giving me the father talk. So I fly out to Boston. Yeah. So I fly out to Boston, have this like amazing trip with this great guy. He hosts me. His family had like a cute little cottage out in, I can't remember it wasn't Cape Cod, but it was like Plymouth Bay or something. outside of Boston, and I'd never seen like the coastal line of the Northeast, and it's beautiful, and Boston's beautiful, so much history, and the people were great. And so he was my tour guide, and he showed me around, and I was there for like a long weekend, and it was cool because there was like no expectations of what we were. And I remember when he took me to the airport to fly back, it was very much like we had a wonderful time. We enjoyed each other's company, and like maybe I'll see you one day again. But it was just cool. It was like, it was great. Yeah. This is the first time that I'd had like an experience where there was like no expectations, no pressure, no like titles, nothing. So that was fun. And I remember before I took off for that trip, one of my best friends, Carly, who's now Paul's wife, I remember her in my bedroom. I was like packing for my trip, and I was telling her how I was nervous, but I was kind of really excited. And like, is this crazy that I'm going across the country to like spend a weekend with this guy that I didn't really know? But I had done my due diligence and like checked him out online enough to make sure that he was legit, said who he was. I also had a backup plan on hand. I had a couple hotels that I had already pinned as like, in case I need to like do my own thing, I can leave. And she was like, I'm so excited for you. She was so supportive. She's like, you go, girl, you do this. So, but I remember when I got back, because boyfriend number 3, who was not boyfriend at the time, I remember on that trip while I was in Boston, I didn't tell him what I was up to, because at that point I didn't owe him an explanation. I told him I was visiting friends in Boston. He knew I was going to Boston, but I didn't share with him it's to like visit this guy. I just shared with him that it was like, yeah, I'm visiting with friends, which was true. And I didn't owe him an explanation. And I was trying to really be intentional about practicing like boundaries and like not needing to share more than I needed to share. And I remember he flipped out. I remember I got a long, like all these text messages from him, like halfway through my trip. I think I was 2 days in, because I don't know if I posted something or if someone said something, but maybe he made the assumption that I was out there visiting a guy, and he blew up my phone and was like, I can't believe you're out there visiting a guy, blah, 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 blah. And he just went off on me. And I remember texting him back being like, mister, like, I don't owe you an explanation. I said his name, but I'm not going to say his name. I don't owe you an explanation. And like, we are not an item, and I've been very open and transparent with you about this. So like, I don't know what your problem is here, but I'm not going to let you ruin my trip. And I just kind of like silenced his messages, or maybe, whatever. So that was a red flag, big time. So I got back, and then I remember I was still really into him though. And so I got back and asked him if he wanted to get together and chat, because I more just wanted to clear the air and at least just like not end our friendship or whatever it was on that note. So I'm asked to meet up with him, and my friend actually at the time, I think it was Carly or Paul, like suggested to go on a walk, because it's like kind of healthy to like digest difficult conversations when you're like walking, as opposed to just like sitting staring at each other, which was a great recommendation. Thanks, Paul and Carly. But so we went on a walk just kind of around our neighborhood and talked through it, and he'd cooled off by that point, but there was definitely some like serious like jealousy issues and insecurities there.
But that wasn't a theme in your relationship with him, was it? I don't think it was.
No.
So I think that was just that
He was starting to fall for me, and I obviously had feelings for him too, and I think he was just probably realizing like,
like, well, I like this
yeah,
one, I might lose her, or
yeah.
whatever.
I think it was, becoming clear that there was feelings there, and it was uncomfortable for him that I was, obviously not just talking to him. Or so fast forward a couple months later, we continue talking, and then eventually become a couple. He was Riley. He was boyfriend number 3, was the boyfriend or the relationship that I feel like I like really started to like become more adventurous and like explore like parts of life that I'd never explored before. Like I went to my first proper music festival with this guy. We went to a few music festivals together. I had smoked weed like once or twice, I think in college, but like not into, but I like actually started kind of exploring cannabis a little bit more, and like, there was just some things that like I was starting to kind of open my eyes up to, that I felt like I was always kind of sheltered earlier on in my 20s, that like he became a very like safe person to kind of explore some of these things with. and it was very like judgment free. And he also was a little bit more experienced than me naturally because he was older. And so there was a lot of like just me like figuring out myself and kind of like I became more of like a free spirit, I feel, in that relationship. How long was it into the relationship? I don't know if I'm skipping too far ahead. I want to go like to the engagement. I don't know if there's anything I'm missing though.
You were with him when he turned 30.
Well, yeah, so we weren't living together. Yeah, we lived separately. Yeah. We snowboarded together. Like it was a fun relationship. Yes, eventually Paul and Carly wanted to live together, and then it was kind of like at a time where Paul and I were living together. He and his roommate at the time were living together. Leases were ending, and people were starting to move in with their significant others. And so then he and I got our apartment together, our first place together. So we were just a couple at this time. Yeah, I was just trying to think if there was anything I was missing, but in terms of like red flags, I mean, I look back on that year and a half that we dated, and it was fun. I mean, there was like some immaturity, which we'll get into more later, but like it was fun. Like it was adventurous. It was fun. Yeah. So we book a flight to Europe. He had never been out of the country before. I had. I find a smoking last minute deal. Like Delta had announced these like stupid cheap flights round trip. It was like $430 round trip to Europe, Portland to Amsterdam nonstop. So we booked this flight, like a 2-week trip, and we've been together like a year and a half at this point. And we had talked about engagement at this point. We had talked about it. I remember, though, to be completely honest, I remember telling my colleague, who's now my best friend, Alina, I remember telling her at the time that, like, I was not ready to be engaged. And I remember, like, him and I were kind of starting to have conversations about this, and the relationship felt like it was progressing, but I knew deep down, I knew that I wasn't ready, and I was kind of hoping that we were going to be buying more time, but it was kind of feeling like it was going that direction. So I was a little bit fearful of that. Or, like, we were living together at this point. We had both talked about long-term things. We even went to a Phoenix little pop-up market where like local small mom and pop shops like sold goods, and like there was a jewelry designer there. And I remember we like talked to the jewelry designer about like, because I wanted a very non-traditional ring, and I remember thinking like, at the time I was super obsessed with turquoise, and I remember thinking like, I wonder if we could do like a turquoise with diamonds engagement ring. And I remember this guy like sat there and like sketched out this whole design, and like he was with me at the time. So like we were talking about things that were like engagement rings and alluding to stuff, but I think I just didn't think it was going to happen that soon. Like I just thought.
So in your head, you saw him as a possible husband, but you
Yes.
weren't ready to maybe necessarily do it right.
Yes. And I didn't feel like he was ready to be in a serious relationship at that point, like that to that serious degree. Like we were kind of working through some things, and there were some concerns I had with the relationship. So I booked this trip to Europe. This is his first time going abroad, and we flew into Amsterdam. This is May of 2017. We fly into Amsterdam, and I'm like flower obsessed. Like I love flowers. I love having fresh flowers in my place. And I had researched and found out that they had, like, Holland is famous for their tulip fields. And they had the tulip season was going on during the time we were there. And you can take a bus or a shuttle out to like the tulip gardens, like these famous, like it's basically like a Disneyland, but for flowers. And this was like day 3 maybe in our trip. We had just got there of a 2-week trip. It was like day 2 or 3 of the trip. So we get out to the tulip gardens, day 3 of our 2-week trip to Europe, and he started acting really weird. Like we were walking around the garden, and I just remember sensing that I kind of saw something was coming. I was like, oh my God, he's proposing. Yeah. Cause he'd be like kind of like lingering and like trying to get me to go a certain path. And I'm like, let me take my photos of the fucking flowers. Why are you like trying to get me to go over here? And we were meandering around, and then we eventually end up in this area of the field, the tulip fields garden. And I think I was like taking a photo, and then I like turned around and he was like on one knee. And I remember that I felt like I started hyperventilating a little bit. Yeah, a little bit of a panic attack. Because we were on this trip and I like really cared for him a lot, and I did love him a lot at the time, but I did not, something was not right. But we were on this trip, and I think deep down I wanted to say not now, but like I didn't have the courage to say that in the middle when we're in the middle of, I'm in Europe, and like this is going to make the rest of the trip incredibly awkward. But I didn't think, I wasn't necessarily like, I don't want to be with this man. I just wasn't ready for that chapter with him yet. So I said yes. But I do remember vividly, like I was not excited like I should have been. I was nervous and I felt uncomfortable. So we continue our trip, and I remember even us getting in stupid arguments on that trip, like within 24 hours. I actually remember first getting this bicker because had I been to Amsterdam before, or was that my first time? I think that was my first time to Amsterdam. But I remember we got in an argument because we were trying to take public transit to like get from like one place to another. And I for sure thought that we had to go that way on the train, and he thought we had to go that way. And somehow, because he was just a hothead, homeboy knows he's a hothead. He was a fucking hothead, and he got so riled up, and he just started like, we were just all of a sudden like almost yelling at each other. And this was like, I think it was later that day or that next day. It was within 24 hours of the proposal. And I remember just thinking, what the fuck? We just got engaged. We should not be like yelling at each other in the middle of fucking Amsterdam, Holland. We should be like on cloud nine, just so much love for each other. No, none of that. And I remember that night we got back to go to dinner, and we went out to eat, and this was the day of the proposal, and we went to eat, and I remember thinking like we should get champagne and like celebrate. And I just remember there was just not enthusiasm, energy coming from him. It didn't feel like, I just remember feeling like, why are you not more excited? And he was like glued to his fucking phone because, oh my God, he was phone obsessed. Social media obsessed, phone obsessed, football obsessed on another degree. Not like this man. So yeah, just all these, yeah. So the rest of the trip was fine. We made some good memories, but it was weird. And then we got back, and I remember we got back to Phoenix, and I remember the next morning we got back like in the evening. We like crashed, obviously super jet lagged. But apparently a lot of our friends had known this was coming, and obviously his parents knew. So we get back, and I'm thinking like, as soon as we get out of our jet lag, naturally I would think you'd want to like maybe meet up with your friends and like family and like celebrate the new engagement. No, he decided that he wanted to like go out and get shit-faced with one of his best friends. This was literally the day after we got back from Europe. And I remember like this was not uncommon of him because he liked to party, he liked to drink, and he liked to go out with his buddies, which those aren't bad things, but it was like I was beginning to see this like behavior pattern that just didn't seem healthy or like compatible for like what I wanted in a relationship. And I remember that was the first like really, really big red flag. So he went out drinking all day, and I didn't see him that whole day. And I remember being at home in our apartment and just sitting there on the couch, like trying to kind of get over my jet lag. And I'm just like looking at this ring on my finger. I'm like, we just got engaged, and you're off getting drunk with your buddy. And like, he didn't even invite me to come along for any of it. Cause you would think if this is his best friend that it'd be kind of like, let's cheers and celebrate together. Like, no, it was almost like he like needed to get away from me. Like, I think we'd had too much of each other. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, we start the wedding planning process, and, we'd set a date to get married the following year. Yeah, following year. And I wedding dress shop, and I had a friend at the time that was running, I think she still is running a wedding planning business. And so met up with them, and we were like fully in like wedding planning mode. So So during the engagement, we were like planning a wedding in Phoenix. He had never lived anywhere outside of Arizona. His company was headquartered in New York City. I had always dreamed about living in New York City. And I can't remember how this happened. I think I was just unhappy with my job at the time, but I started looking for opportunities and came across a company that was headquartered in New York City in Williamsburg, and they had a recruiter opening, and I applied. And I remember we got to a point where he was actually kind of like alluding to that he wanted to maybe consider living outside, and he might have opportunities to move to New York. And so that would be great, because then that would like allow us to go together as a couple. But we kind of got in this weird place in our relationship, like halfway through our engagement, where like it became clear that like he wasn't set on moving or leaving Phoenix. And I very much knew that Phoenix was not my forever home. And I wanted to see more of the world and like experience other cities. And so I went through with the interview process with this company, flew out to New York City. I went through like 4 rounds of interviews, flew out for the final round. A little bit, I think. A little bit. Because I think it was kind of like we were getting to a point where I was realizing he wasn't on board to go to New York, but I was just at a point where I felt like we weren't a team anymore. And I kind of was feeling like I needed to do what was best for me at that point. So I flew out to New York. For sure thought I had it. I was like touring apartments with a broker. Like I felt so good about this interview. Didn't end up getting it, and I was heartbroken, but it's okay. It wasn't meant to be. And then I remember in January of 2018, we had mom and dad Jim flew out from Oregon to visit and actually meet his parents for the first time, because I wanted them to meet at least before we got married. And we had all these like wedding things planned. So mom and I went to do like cake tasting at a local bakery. I think I'd already bought my wedding dress at this point, so that was already done and out of the way. And then we were trying to determine who we wanted to cater our wedding. So we had a cater tasting where she came to our house, and his parents were there and my parents were there. And we had this whole like event where we did like a dinner that was kind of like a sampling. And I remember like it was yesterday, sitting at that table and having my parents there, his parents there. I'm pretty sure his sister was probably there too. And we were all sitting there having this amazing like food that was supposed to be the tasting for our wedding. It was like mole sauce, and it was great. All this amazing Mexican food. I remember sitting there like thinking to myself, this is not right. Like, this is not right. I think it was the buildup, just because there was like parts of the wedding planning process that like going through steps, and like even going to like taste cupcakes and like cake tastings with mom like the day before, that morning of. I just remember feeling like I should be more excited right now. Like, why am I not? I was more like excited to eat some sweets with my mom, but I was not like, this is my wedding like cake. I didn't feel excited. He was not super engaged in it. I could feel that he wasn't. That was annoying me, and something wasn't off. It didn't feel right. Yeah. So it was this like big like light bulb moment. And I remember coming downstairs one morning. Parents were staying with us at the time at the house we were staying at. He was still asleep in bed. I came downstairs. I think dad Jim was still asleep too. And mom and I were in the kitchen, and I remember this like it was yesterday. I remember this was the day after the tasting of the dinner. I remember looking at mom and saying, I think she could tell that something was off. Like I was a little like teary eyed or something. And she was like, "What's wrong, honey?" And I was like, "Mom, I can't do this. Like, I cannot do this." Yeah, she had a rock star mom moment. And I remember her saying was like, "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do." And that is like the support that I needed for sure, because, you know, no one wants to be the one that calls off a wedding. And at this point, I didn't think I wanted to break up with him. I just didn't think we were ready to get married yet. So I just wanted to put the wedding on hold. That was fully my intention. Just put it on pause. I think we have some things that we're not on the same page with and that we're not compatible with. We need to like have some serious conversations. So, and I think prior to this, I had, you know, I don't want to go too much into our relationship at this point, but like, I think prior to this leading up, I had some concerns, and I tried to get him to go to therapy with me to kind of just talk. Oh, premarital. I was really a big fan of premarital counseling, because I just felt like, you know, there's a lot of fucking divorce in my family, our family. I have 8 grandparents, guys. I have 8 grandparents because everyone has been divorced and remarried at least once. My dad's on his 3rd marriage. My mom's on her 2nd marriage. All my grandparents have been divorced and remarried. Sorry, I can take that out if you want. Love you. And so I just thought, you know, it wouldn't hurt to just maybe have premarital counseling, to just, there's probably some things that we could talk about that we might not think to talk about, just to try to like avoid, like, right, if we're gonna get married, let's try to avoid getting divorced. That just seems logical.
That's the quote of the day.
And yeah, and he was just so not for this. We went one time. I think we only went one time, but it took me weeks and weeks of really bugging him to finally get him to go. And he just was like not happy about it. Cause he just thought therapy was, I guess, something he wasn't a fan of. Right. So anywho, had that conversation with mom in the kitchen. They were actually flying out that day to go back to Oregon. And I remember I went upstairs and he could tell something was off. And I was like, hey, gotta get up. We have to pack up and like take them to the airport. And he could tell something was off and I couldn't hide it from him. So I just, somehow it came out and I just basically was like, I think we need to like pause and just kind of, I want to maybe put the wedding on hold. I'm having some concerns. And he immediately kind of went into like, I'm sure concerned mode. And so we took my parents to the airport. I remember I took him back to the apartment. He crashed to take a nap. And then I remember Carly, one of my best friends, texted me because she also lived downtown. And she was like, hey, like, do you want to grab a drink at one of our favorite little bars? And it was so like, is serendipitous the word? I don't know what the word would be. Fortuitous? Yeah.
Like it was a good thing? Lucky?
Yeah. It's almost like, I don't know if she sensed something or if this is just the universe like taking care of me, but she invited me to get a drink and we sat down. I remember her just saying, how are you doing? And I just like word vomited all of my like emotions and everything I was feeling. And I told her how I wasn't feeling like this was right and something was off. And I was kind of like having this panic moment about it. And then I remember her saying, okay, well, you know what? Like you can just, it's totally okay. Like no one's going to judge you. Just put things on hold, put the wedding on hold, like take your time. But at that point, I think all of my emotions from like months and months and months and frustrations had caught up to me. And I was just like, no, I'm over. Like I just was like emotionally over it. Cause this was months and months and months of like, him and I were arguing and we had so many arguments at this point. It was just exhausting. Like I'm not a yeller, but we were getting in heated arguments and we were yelling and screaming at each other. And that's just, I've never seen that side of myself. And I didn't like that side of myself. It didn't feel healthy. No. Just, yeah. And just getting so worked up and like not being able to process my emotions. We were just butting heads and it was exhausting. And so I think at that point, I just was over it. I just knew, I think for a long time it was not right, but I finally got to this breaking point. And so I tried to approach it with him like I needed a break, needed to pause things, but I think maybe he could sense it. I don't know. I don't want to speak for him, but he sensed something was probably more serious than it was that I was leading on to be. And so he basically was like, okay, we need to be done. So, well, I like kind of, I mean, it was kind of one of those things where I was trying to say like, let's just take a minute, like to pause. But like his feathers were ruffled by that and his ego was probably there a little bit too. And so, I moved in temporarily with Paul and Carly because they had a spare bedroom. And then my birthday was coming up around the corner and I have grandparents that live in Hawaii. And so mom actually gave me the suggestion. She's like, why don't you go visit your grandparents? Just like fly out for like a long weekend, just like clear your head, get some space, go hang out with them, hang out on the beach, just like get some fresh air. And like, cause we were kind of in this, I don't think we had fully broken up yet, but we were like, it was ending and like we were trying to have space. And I got back from Hawaii after hanging out with my grandparents for my birthday. and he had moved all of the things from our apartment and taken them out of our apartment and shoved them into my car. And so my little Toyota Corolla, little tiny 4-door Corolla, was in our parking garage of our apartment, packed from the floorboard to the ceiling, filled with all my stuff. And I didn't even have tinted windows. All my valuables were in there. So he just went in full on kind of like FU mode. And then I ended up staying with our friends, Derek and Lindsay. They were kind enough to let me stay with them for a month or two because Carly's bridal shower was coming up around the corner. And I knew at that point I decided to move back to Oregon because that's when I moved to Bend. But I wanted to stay around for her bridal shower. So I stuck around, had her bridal shower. I was in her wedding, so wanted to be there for that. And then you came down. My dad came down, flew down. Yeah. 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 My dad flew all the way down. And we loaded up my little Toyota Corolla, manual, by the way. No no cruise control. Holy moly. And we drove nonstop. I can't believe we didn't stop once. How the hell did we do that? But we didn't sleep. We drove straight from Phoenix, Arizona to Bend, Oregon. Oh, we were starting to hallucinate a little bit. Yeah. So we drove all the way and then I moved to Bend, and that was kind of like a reset period for my life. Like learning lessons to kind of wrap up from boyfriend number 3, fiance number 1. I think like my expectations of what was like a partnership was just not the same as what his expectations were. I feel like that's fair to say, there was a lack of maturity in that relationship. There was a lot of selfishness in that relationship. And there was just things we weren't on the same page with. Like he made it pretty clear that he felt passionately about having kids. And I had always said that I didn't know if I wanted to have kids. And that was something I remember always feeling a little bit of like, oh, this doesn't feel great, because it's one thing if you both are kind of like, maybe, but to have one person be like, yes, I want kids. And then I'm like, I don't want to get married to someone and then that person wake up one day and regret that they didn't ever have kids because their partner refused to. So there was just a lot of things that we weren't aligned on. But I have a lot of good memories with him, and he was like a big part of like my journey and my growth, and we had a lot of fun together, like I mentioned. No, there was no cheating. There was no animosity. I wish him the best. We still have some mutual friends, kind of. So yeah, it was, just part of the journey. So boyfriend number 3, that's a wrap.